Hi there, John Wilkinson, History Made Easier. I sat down 10 minutes ago to scribble some thoughts down in preparation for this video. This video is going to look at the rise to power of what I call the bad boys. Lenin, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler and Mao. And I wanted to try and tease out where the rise to power of these 5 different leaders compares and where it contrasts. And this is what I came up with. If we look at Lenin's rise to power, essentially he rose to power as a result of revolution. Tsarism had collapsed. The Romanov dynasty had been struggling for quite some time, but it collapsed under the strain of World War I. And the provisional government struggled itself with continuing the war. And so clearly World War I is a major backdrop to any explanation of Lenin and the Bolsheviks' rise to power. But if we're looking at that rise to power, I think we should also think about the way in which Lenin and the Bolsheviks consolidated their hold on power. And that took a civil war. So I think that should come into play as well. So Lenin and his rise to power. As for Stalin, I think the key factor here is that the Communist Party are, of course, already in power. And so Stalin comes to power personally as a result of inner party intrigue. Lenin is still a factor here because it's Lenin's legacy that dominates that debate going on within the party. Who is the truest Leninist? Stalin, he might not have been the truest Leninist, but he wins the argument and so gains power. But within that, we have the direction that the party is going to take. And within that, we have the debate that if it doesn't explain Stalin's rise to power, it certainly helps explain his consolidation of power, and that is the debate between socialism in one country and permanent revolution. So the common factor with Lenin's rise to power and Stalin's rise to power is Lenin. And then I think we have some sharp contrasts. When it comes to Mussolini, I would say the essential factor behind his rise to power is civil unrest. Italy had never been at ease with itself. It had never been truly united. And so we have the legacy of the Risorgimento, that Italians still need to be created. And we also have the legacy of World War I and that sense of a mutilated victory that Italians had, that they should have got more out of the peace treaties for their sacrifices. I think behind all of this, we have the threat of communism, or at least socialism. And I think we should note that the civil unrest was largely the result of the fascists themselves. They created the unrest that they benefited from. So we have World War I that is a common factor with Lenin's rise to power. But again, I think we have some sharp contrasts there. Now, if we turn to Hitler, well, Hitler comes to power essentially from the intrigue from the elites and from the fact that the Nazi Party polled more votes than any other party. They were the biggest party in the Reichstag. So I think it's a balance of kind of palace intrigue here, with Hindenburg at the centre of all of this, and von Papen and Schleicher. But we can't forget the fact that the Nazis polled better than anybody else in elections. Behind that, I think the big factor is the Great Depression. I don't think we could see a way in which the Nazis were going to win those votes if it hadn't been for the Great Depression. But behind that, there was also the threat of communism as well. Their votes were doing very well as a result of the Great Depression. And of course, there were the Social Democrats as well. So we have a similarity there with Italy. As well, we have the frustrations of the Treaty of Versailles, and so a link back to World War I, and a link there with Italy and its mutilated victory. We had that period of presidential government, a period in which the elites themselves set out to bring about a return to authoritarian government. So again, that palace intrigue, that factor that the Nazis benefited from the fact that the elites themselves never liked Weimar and were never comfortable with this democratic experiment, as they would see it. And I think, back to the winning by votes, I think we have to give credit to the Nazis as being really the ultimate electoral machine, a brilliant party organisation to rein in those votes. Nothing had been seen like it before. They really did lead the way on how to win votes. It was only really the fact that we had PR that prevented them, I think, from outright control of the Reichstag. Any other political system other than PR, I think, would have seen the Nazis in power legitimately with a majority in the Reichstag. So full credit to their party machine. So finally, if we turn to the last of our bad boys, we have Mao. Now Mao comes to power as a result of civil war. It doesn't help him consolidate power, it helps him gain power. But there is a backdrop there as well, because while civil war is going on, China is also fighting the Japanese. We are in the midst of World War II as well. So if World War I helps us explain, at least in part, the rise to power of Lenin, the rise to power of Mussolini, the rise to power of Hitler, World War II helps explain the rise to power of Mao. And victory was never likely. We have to acknowledge that. Victory was never really likely for the communists. It was against the odds that they won the Civil War and achieved power. So I think we have to give credit to the way in which they They focused not simply on fighting the nationalists, but they focused on defeating the Japanese. And in this, really, the communists, in the eyes of the people, were the true nationalists, not the Nationalist Party. So I think contrasts there as well, but there is that similarity of world war as a common factor. But the key common factor, I think, and I think it's plain to see, the key common factor in all these 5 rises to power, these 5 leaders, is their leadership. They showed determination, they showed vision, they showed courage. We might question a bit of that with Mussolini. I would accept that. But that apart, and Mussolini still led, that apart, I think the common factor across these 5 leaders is their character and their leadership. So I hope that was useful. If nothing else, I think it's interesting, and I think it will give you some analytical tools there in which to kind of build your history onto these kind of overriding factors that I've outlined. So I hope you found it useful as well as interesting. As always, I will thank you for listening, and as always, I remind you to check out my website, History Made Easier. But for now, cheers.